Blinken reveals the stance of the American administration, the real stance, a categorical rejection of a ceasefire in Gaza despite the massacres. So the talk about humanitarian truces, will this serve the Israeli plans? Netanyahu also has illusions about his army's ability to eliminate Hamas and seize control of Gaza, with the American administration making suggestions about the future of the Gaza Strip. Hamas with a clear, decisive response, which included images. The Yemeni armed forces announced that they shot down an American drone which was carrying out surveillance missions in the Yemeni airspace. What are the scopes of the missions carried out by Washington on behalf of the Israeli occupation? So more than 1 month since the beginning of Gaza being subject to unprecedented brutal bombardment, a choking siege, a genocide in its ugliest form. This did not change Washington's stance, rejecting an end of the aggression. The American Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, when he said that Washington categorically objects to a ceasefire in Gaza from the G7 podium, he also criticized similar calls. He said that those who are calling for an immediate ceasefire must commit to explaining how they will explain the unacceptable results which could come about. Now, this contradicts all of the claims which were quoted from Biden and others that they strive to achieve a humanitarian truce which Israel refused. And this was reflected clearly on the meeting of the G7 foreign ministers, who announced what they called Israel's right to self-defense in a way which is in agreement with international law. But at the same time, they stressed the importance of truces and humanitarian corridors without calling for a ceasefire. A mandate for continuing the aggression comes at a time where the Israeli occupation army is striving to achieve a real results on the ground. As the occupation claims that some tanks were able to go do an incursion inside Gaza, the Palestinian resistance factions stressed that they destroyed some tanks and prevented the troops from advancing. It also broadcasted images which showed this, destroying tanks from short distances. It also said that heavy losses were inflicted in the ranks of the Israeli soldiers. We'll discuss these topics, viewers, with our guest, Dr. Mohammed Halassa, an expert on Israeli affairs from occupied Quds, Dr. Ghazi Hamad, member of the political bureau of Hamas in Gaza, and also Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, who is an expert in international affairs. He's joining us from London live. I'll begin with Dr. Hamad. Dr. Ghazi, greetings to you and greetings to all of our guests and viewers. But I'll start with the most recent developments. There is now some leaks about a truce, an imminent truce for 3 days in exchange for the release of some of those being held captive under certain descriptions, a certain category of those held captive. Are we indeed close to such an understanding? The answer is, up until now, this is up for discussion, and there are contacts and talks between various parties striving to reach a certain vision in this regard. We have a stance, and we strive with a lot of the mediators, especially the Qatari brothers, who are exerting great efforts to address this. There is more than one point of view, more than one idea, but I can't say that we're very close or that there's a clear vision. And the main reason is that the Zionist occupation is standing as a major obstacle. And I say this very clearly. The occupation takes complete responsibility for what is happening with the Israeli prisoners. It doesn't care about them, and I'm responsible for what I say because Israel bombed a lot of areas. We even heard some Israeli ministers who spoke very clearly that they don't care about the Israeli prisoners, and maybe they might be fuels or sacrifices in this war. And so it insists on continuing with American support, continuing with the revenge and killings, trying to cause the death of the highest number of people. And so hence, as I said, Israel, every time Netanyahu says that his major goal is to retrieve the kidnapped, as he says, but in reality he's not doing anything. He's not even making any achievements. He can't convince the people to go in this direction, whether it be by contacting the mediators or even on the battlefield. And so I believe there is no clear, tangible progress, because we have an Israeli obstacle which could not care less about the prisoners. But Dr. Ghazi, Israeli media outlets, they are the ones, and they quote Egyptian sources and say that we might have approached, come close to such an understanding. The answer is we did come close, but it was thwarted, obstructed in the final moments by the Israeli occupation. This was about 1 week or 10 days ago. There could have been a deal. However, things are continuing, and it's up for discussion. Blinken is traveling throughout the world. His main concern is he talks with the Qataris, with the Egyptians, with the Turks, with all different parties. He focuses on freeing the prisoners in Gaza. However, as I said, he cannot confront the Israeli occupation to take responsibility, because it is a major obstacle in preventing an agreement. We announced our stance, and I think that Abu Ubaida, our colleague, the spokesman for Qassam Brigades, he made a speech a few days ago. He said we were ready to free dozens of prisoners, but Israel obstructed, because Israel does not want any excuse which could prevent it from continuing its acts of killings. Every day, large numbers of casualties, targeting of headquarters, targeting of hospitals, and so the approach regarding the prisoners might stop it. And as I said, the current Israeli policy is to continue the killing and displacing them from the north and to the south. So I repeat once again, Israel is not concerned about retrieving the prisoners, nor is it serious in reaching such a deal. Allow me to go to Jerusalem now, to Dr. Muhammad. Dr. Muhammad, how did you follow the Israeli debate? It was of great interest of the Israeli media outlets this evening, and they quoted political sources, contradictory statements. Israeli political sources told Channel 13 that we are close to a truce, or that there is readiness for a large prisoner swap instead of a truce. Netanyahu, on the other hand, said no ceasefire, these are rumors, this is damaging, these statements, etc. So, Dr. Muhammad, does this reflect an internal disagreement in the Israeli government at the political and military level when it comes to how to deal with these international demands? The answer is maybe it reflects a wish to have an achievement which this Israeli political leadership can give to the Israeli population in light of the failure of Israel to have any achievements since the beginning of this blind war it's been waging against Gaza. Netanyahu, because he hasn't been able to have any achievements, he cannot at this moment announce a truce with the Israeli people without having anything he could give to them, to this community, present to them as a heroic achievement which he's been able to make. And so you see the ceiling of threats and the rhetoric and the Israeli terminology day by day from the Israeli political leadership, and they still hold, this Israeli political leadership still sticks to this call of a zero sum, as if it's a war either us or them. And so they're trying one way or another. Netanyahu in particular is trying to cover up the failure, whereby he is incapable of presenting a clear achievement. And it's important to point out, even in this state of frustration in the Israeli community, there are also sentiments that some of the Israeli military and the war cabinet are insisting on having statements. We saw 3 press conferences, 3 separate Israeli conferences yesterday. So Netanyahu still feels that there is a state of enmity, and so he's further hardening his rhetoric. And today, even the narrative, the rhetoric was significant. The Israeli media spoke about a small rest, not a truce. So they sense that the terminologies also their significance, and in light of such a community, even one word has an impact. And Netanyahu cannot come and present a humanitarian truce or do any such step without having something in his hands, some achievement. Gaza resistance, their firm stance is putting Netanyahu in a corner. That's why he's responding with fire. He wants the truce to include a large number of these prisoners to be liberated in exchange only for fuel and for a very short-term truce and opening certain corridors. I think that the resistance will stick to one sense. So Netanyahu, Dr. Muhammad, he is putting his money on the fuel and humanitarian assistance in exchange for Israeli prisoners, not just those who were other nationalities who were also taken captive on October 7. Dr. Ghazi, is this possible? The answer is, look, as I said, I don't want to refer to the details, but there are serious contacts taking place from all different parties. The Americans did say to more than one party that they want to close this file of the prisoners as soon as possible, because it puts pressure on the Israeli community. And as I said, the Israeli community is starting to feel very bitter, as Netanyahu wasn't able to make any political achievement. He wasn't able to break Hamas, as he said. He wasn't able also to retrieve the prisoners in Gaza. And so he's confronting a 3-way failure. 2 days ago there was an opinion poll. For the first time ever since Netanyahu took up his post in the occupation state, 76% are demanding his resignation. This is dangerous. Very, very deep divisions in the Israeli community. They are talking about a huge failure in Gaza and making achievements and retrieving the prisoners. However, at the same time, our stance is clear. We informed the mediators we are ready to be flexible as much as possible. We have clear demands, we have details. We hope that this will be solved soon, and we are striving also in order to put an end to the aggression on our people on Gaza and for the humanitarian aid to enter the Strip. But what is more important, as I said, the Gaza Strip, as you say in your channel, it's about the future of Gaza. We're going to talk about this soon, Dr. Ghazi. But what is strange is to call for prisoners in exchange for humanitarian aid. This aid should enter without conditions, whether it be the fuel, the aid. This is normal, but we are now talking about a state and an entity which is abnormal. Anyway, allow me to go to London to Dr. Marcus. Good evening. Now, the whole world, even those who support Israel, even the United States of America and the G7, whom we were talking about just moments ago, the whole world and the United Nations Secretary General, they are all calling for a humanitarian truce because of the very difficult, catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. The whole world is calling for a humanitarian truce, and Israel says, no, I won't. Now, what does this mean, Dr. Marcus? What does this mean for you?
Well, first of all, there will only be a temporary ceasefire or a permanent ceasefire if America and Israel decide so. And if and when that day comes, it will be because the Americans and the Israelis believe that such a ceasefire is in the interests of the Israeli state. So, for instance, if the High Command of the Israel Defense Forces believes that it will not be able to militarily defeat Hamas, and by continuing the war in Gaza, this will weaken Israel as a whole, then, of course, Tel Aviv and Washington will bring about a ceasefire. Furthermore, because Israel is America's primary conduit in the Middle East for its influence and power, it follows, therefore, that a weakened Israel means a weakened America in the Middle East, and vice versa. A weakened America means a weakened Israel. So that is why the Americans and the Israelis will decide if there will be a ceasefire. On top of that, the Netanyahu factor is a very important one. Netanyahu is fighting for his political survival at home. He is facing very serious charges of corruption, and also he is overseeing extremely controversial judicial reforms. Therefore, he needs some kind of victory in Gaza in order to secure his leadership. If he feels he cannot do that, then that is when it is possible that the Americans could take command and say to the Israelis, you have to bring about a ceasefire, because it is simply the case that America cannot keep on providing the political cover to the Israelis when the Israelis are openly carrying out a horrendous massacre of Palestinian civilians, including Palestinian children. And we now hear that approximately 4,000 Palestinian children have been killed by the Israelis. So not even American mainstream media can forever provide cover to the Israelis when the Israelis are carrying out a slaughter in full public view, and they have no compunctions about doing that. Regarding how much of the world is calling for a ceasefire, well, again, if we are talking about countries in the Western world, in the West sphere of influence, it is not because the ruling elites of these countries care for the plight of the Palestinian people. No, it is because they cannot indefinitely keep on defending the Israelis when the Israelis are carrying out a slaughter in full public view. That is putting enormous pressure on the British ruling elite, on the ruling elites of the European Union, the ruling elites in Canada. Again, they support Israel wholeheartedly. They know that without Israel, there can be no Western supremacy in West Asia. But at the same time, they are struggling to defend Israel's actions in Gaza when the Israelis, as I keep on saying, are carrying out a slaughter of civilians in broad daylight, and they make no compunctions about it. Indeed, a senior Israeli official only said recently that Israel does not bomb for accuracy. Israel bombs to destroy. The Israelis are not even hiding their intentions. And when it comes to the argument that Israel has a right to self-defense, even this is no longer tenable for the Western ruling elites. Because yes, every country in the world has a right to self-defense, but no country in the world has a right to invade another country, to bomb another country, to slaughter civilians, including women and children, in the name of self-defense. And the Western ruling elites are acutely aware that there is no more cover they can provide to the Israelis, and there is no defense under international law for what the Israelis are doing in Gaza.
If you allow me, to interrupt, this issue of the ruling elite, it needs a separate discussion. The international law, the UN organizations which were completely neglected or ignored, and the international law which was thrown against the wall, all of these Western values reaching up to freedom of expression in the West and to express solidarity with the Palestinians even on social media podiums. This all, I think, requires a broader discussion, broader than what we are discussing right now. But I would like to go back to Dr. Razi Hamad once again regarding the situation on the ground. Dr. Razi, today the whole world listened to the spokesman of the Qassam brigades, the military spokesman Abu Ubaidah. The situation on the ground for Qassam and for the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, based upon what Abu Ubaidah says, seems to be very good. Up until now, despite the price the Gaza Strip is paying, I'm talking here about the civilian casualties and especially the children, can the Qassam brigades continue? You're confronting us on the battlefield, and hence we'll kill more civilians and impose or strengthen the siege. It's a painful equation. Can the resistance persevere? The answer is, I can say with all confidence, that's what's going on the battlefield. There's control, and there are surprise attacks and initiatives from the Qassam brigades. The spokesman of the occupation army, every day he says that they killed armed personnel and that they targeted or they hit Hamas targets. I challenge him to give me one piece of evidence with images and voice that they were able to reach the leaders of Qassam or military targets or anything else. We are showing images and sound how we are targeting the tanks. So I believe, I'm very confident what's going on the battlefield is a defeat being inflicted on the occupation state. As I said, this happened in 1948 and 1967, etc. What gives it the upper hand is the Air Force power. But once again, I said, the worst army, the army which suffers from cowardice more than any other army in the world, is the Israeli army. They don't know how to fight. Thank God, our brothers have a great capability in equipment, in quality, even the Yasin rockets, which are able to infiltrate the tanks, which they believe were the best tanks in the world. We are confronting them with all strength. And as you can see on the images on your screen, thank God, indeed, a big defeat is being inflicted. The army of the occupation has confessed to 34 deaths in the ranks of its soldiers, including generals and senior ranks, but I'm sure that the number is higher than this. The number of tanks destroyed in Gaza is a very high number, and as I said, the occupation cannot advance on the ground. It's on the same locations, so for this reason I believe they will be dealt a big defeat. The occupation, they're still talking about difficult days, they're talking about big losses and also soldiers who have fallen. So I said the battle will decide Israel. This happens also in South Lebanon. Israel, when it feels that the price is higher, that it's not able to make any military achievement on the ground, then I believe they will be convinced that this useless operation, they weren't able to break Hamas, nor were they able to reach the leader of resistance, nor to retrieve the prisoners, or to occupy Gaza. Today, Israel is in a very shameful position. As your guest said, if Israel is weak, America is weak. And so for this reason, America is throwing its full weight, its military and financial material capabilities behind Israel so that Israel can have achievement against Hamas. So, Dr. Ghazi, so you refer to the images which the whole world is following and what Qassam displayed. There is a miracle. Let history record. Maybe we are like feeling the pain due to the bombardment of Gaza. Maybe we're in a hot period. The world maybe is following these images whilst the battle is continuing. But if we will put it in the history framework, the history of the Arabs in the conflict, we find ourselves to be in extraordinary times based upon what we see. However, Dr. Ghazi, the Israeli military doctrine, it is clear that it wants to intimidate, terrorize the Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians by adopting a doctrine of killing civilians and massacres and demolishing or destroying cities. So if you carry out resistance operations, we will destroy cities and kill your women and men and children and the infrastructure, just like they're threatening Lebanon today. So this could be a problem for the resistance movements in Palestine and the region in general. The answer is, my dear brother, the history of Israel is massacres. It's been massacres from 1948 until today in Palestine and in Lebanon and even in Egypt. Israel, its genetic makeup, its physical makeup, is massacres. Because, as I said, it can't confront, it can't fight, it doesn't have the will to fight, it doesn't have the courage, and so it expresses its rage against civilians. Today, every time we have a military achievement, again the tanks against the soldiers, today they struck in Sabra, Jatun, and Jabalia. As I said, 99.9% of the casualties are civilians. This hurts us. We do feel great sorrow for it, but at the same time it also proves that this army is a failure. It can't fight, nor can it make any military achievement. So for this reason we believe that it will be a double defeat for Israel. Israel's image fell on October 7. This awe which Israel used to enjoy, some countries believed that Israel could cover the Middle East and be the main warhead of the United States of America and the warhead of the Western system. This has been dashed away and it won't come back. As I said, this image is like a glass mirror which has been broken, despite the price we paid. But I'd like to reassure you, we in Gaza, we are in daily contact. There is resistance, there is a force. We also have a lot of surprises. God willing, the upcoming days will reveal that the resistance has the upper hand in inflicting defeat and losses in the ranks of the occupation army. Dr. Muhammad Halasa in Jerusalem, for 1.5 months, the leaders of the occupation, Netanyahu, Gallant, others, they repeat the same goals. No future for Hamas in Gaza. Will eliminate Hamas. We will arrest Sinwar, Muhammad Daif. We will put an end to Hamas in Gaza. And later on we'll also discuss the issue of the future of Gaza and how this is addressed. But up until now, there don't seem to be any indicators that these goals are going to be achieved, whether it be on the battlefield, although they've been made incursions, and also politically. Up until now, there is no achievement which could make them say that one of these goals which they spoke about could be achieved. How will Israel deal with this? They prepared their community, their population, that's it. We can't go back except if one of these goals are achieved. But what if, as it seems, they can't? What do they do then? The answer is, I will answer your question in two directions. The first is that this political leadership is trying to cover up this malfunction and the lack of a strategic vision in the Israeli society by intensifying the threats and upping the rhetoric. That's why I said that they refer to the zero-sum game. existential war, us or them, and the Israeli community needs to be mobilized. It needs this front which they feel is suffering. So they want this population to continue to support them. So, in light of these zero achievements, as you said from the beginning, up until the 7th of October, up until now, the Israeli political leadership has no choice but to escalate the mobilizing rhetoric, to try and pump in the blood of war in the Israeli society. Although the Israelis aren't capable of achieving these goals, not to mention the Israeli society or community, in this community, in this society, despite all of this material and economical harm, but with this spirit of war and being mobilized in support of this leadership, they feel that they could continue. So for this reason, they talk about the existential war. But there are conditions for this. The first of all, that these political goals which the Israelis are talking about can be achieved. So there are many people in the Israeli society who believe that these goals can't be achieved. Especially today, I follow the Israeli media. They ask, give us evidence, give us tangible proof of what's going on the ground. Nothing. As this leads me to the next point, that the conditions being set by the Israeli society, in addition to these political goals to be able to achieve, for there to be a leadership that can achieve these goals. There is a crisis in the Israeli society, and Mr. Ghazi said before that 76% of the Israelis believe that Netanyahu must resign and must be tried. This is happening in the midst of a war. First time we're seeing it in the Israeli society. And what Israel is also trying to do to cover up is to prevent or impose embargoes. Israel used to film everything in their heroics, between quotations. Today we only hear verbal statements about achievements, and they will prevent even the speech of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah when it was being translated live. Today it's embargoed. Abu Ubaida's speeches are not allowed because this leadership believes that every word said now will have an impact, and it could really have repercussions and backfire. So it's a fragile situation, Dr. Muhammad, and they cannot put up or cannot tolerate any impact from the media or even the images. So, especially that Hamas now has mastered the narrative, especially when it comes to the prisoner swaps, and maybe the Israelis don't want these repercussions to be felt by the Israeli society. I'd like to conclude with Mr. Marcus, because he's going to leave us in the first part. Dr. Marcus, now, as Israel and the United States, as they are trying in an insane criminal manner to force the Gaza Strip to bow down, we see the world also challenging in a state of insurgency. The whole world is reacting and speaking out, and the Palestinian version about what's going on in Gaza, and even beyond, even the conflict as a whole. So we're seeing this story infiltrate into the West, and we see that the world public opinion is speaking out against the Israeli practices, expressing itself against the Israeli practices. This will have long-term deep repercussions, Dr. Marcus, isn't it so?
It should be said, first of all, that the myth of Israeli military invincibility is just that, a myth. And it was born out of Israel's spectacular victory in 1967, which was not so much due to Israeli military superiority, but more a result of Arab incompetence on the battlefield. But that said, no one should underestimate the Israeli military, and more so, no one should underestimate the resolve of the Americans to ensure that Israel does not become weakened. It is also possible that the war in Gaza could end in a very similar way, or the same way as the war in 2006 ended, when the Israelis decided that they could no longer defeat Hezbollah. Therefore, the IDF retreated back into Israel. That could happen in Gaza. The high command of the IDF could conclude that the IDF cannot defeat Hamas militarily. Therefore, the IDF retreats back into Israel. Regarding world opinion, yes, it is very evident to everyone that the majority of ordinary people in the world, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of religion, are sympathetic to the Palestinian people. They are becoming more and more aware of the horrors that have been inflicted on the Palestinians since 1948. And that is why I said earlier that the Western ruling elites can no longer provide the kind of cover to Israel that it once was, not with the likes of social media being in existence now. Even we see Western mainstream media are giving some space to the Palestinians. Even Western mainstream media is acknowledging that Israel could be committing crimes against civilians, because not even Western mainstream media can conceal the horrific nature of the Israeli military campaign in Gaza. But again, as I said earlier, do not underestimate the resolve of the Israelis. Do not underestimate the resolve of the Americans. The Americans will go to any lengths to ensure that its supremacy in West Asia remains intact. And it will do all it has to do for Israel in order to secure it. If it means sending more and more weaponry to the Israelis in order to sustain their losses in Gaza, then they will do that. But at the same time, if the Americans believe that Israel cannot win in Gaza, then the Americans, despite the Israel lobby in Washington, the Americans will say to the Israeli government, enough is enough. You are weakening yourself. You are therefore weakening us in the Middle East, and you have to withdraw the IDF from Gaza.
So when they feel that Israel is failing, they will put an end to this war. Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, expert on tertiary affairs from London. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.